I'm Tom Baker. This is Chasing Cars. Next to me is the new W214 chassis Mercedes-Benz E-Class. Now, while cars like the E-Class and its rivals, the BMW 5 Series and Audi A6, are no longer especially popular in the luxury car segment here in Australia because people have moved to SUVs, the launch of an all-new E-Class is still a big deal for Mercedes-Benz. This is one of the brand's longest running vehicles in its history, and the E-Class still stands for mid-size to large luxury sedan motoring without having to make a jump to the S-Class. There are discerning buyers who simply do not want an SUV, nor do they want a BMW or an Audi. They want an E-Class. And the one next to me here is basically the only E-Class coming to Australia that isn't a full fat AMG model. This is the only sort of luxury spec E-Class, if you like, the E300 with a 2-litre, 48-volt, turbocharged petrol 4-cylinder engine. You can see that it still does wear quite a bit of AMG accouterment as standard, even though it's not a proper AMG vehicle. In this video, I'll let you know how fit for purpose the specification is for our market. We'll also check out the interior, back seat and boot of the E-Class. We'll discuss the running costs, and then we'll take a drive to see whether this vehicle still delivers on the sort of everyday serenity and luxury that you expect from a vehicle with this badge. But before we get started, hit subscribe below. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. Jumping into the new Mercedes-Benz E-Class is to take in a completely different interior concept to the generation that came before. And your eye does jump immediately to this huge piece of glass that stretches just from the side of the steering wheel across to the A-pillar on the passenger side of the vehicle. Now, it isn't a huge screen. There's actually 2 screens under here, and you can see the gaps very easily. But it's still an impressive piece of interior architecture if you're quite techie and you like things that are really up to the minute. The central screen is really large, no matter how you put it. It's angled quite dramatically, and in shadow, like we're sitting now, everything's really visible and easy to use, particularly because the software is even more intuitive than the old E-Class. It's really quite simple to operate. Plus you have wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless Android Auto, and many drivers will just use that software anyway. The problem is that this screen does not hold up well to sunshine. All of your fingerprints come to the fore, and the content of the screen is actually really hard to see. That's not ideal. The passenger also gets a small screen of their own as standard. How necessary this is a question that I would like to put to you. Does a passenger screen add a lot of value for the person in the front? For me as a passenger, I don't really care about it. I'm usually driving the car, however, hence why I'm asking your opinion. Thankfully, the driver's screen is nowhere near as susceptible to sunlight as these two over here, and I haven't had any issues seeing this display, despite the fact it doesn't have a traditional cowl. Moving on to the steering wheel, you get a very sporty looking wheel as standard in the E-Class with a flat bottom, perforated sections which feel really good. The rim's quite thick, not as much as the BMW, but it's getting there. Metal paddle shifters for the gearbox in the car, and also these fiddly little spokes with buttons which are far too small and which Mercedes really needs to either enlarge or simplify, because even I struggle. I think a lot of other people are going to find this just a little bit annoying. The rest of the cabin is pretty attractive, to be honest. What you see here is really the base E-Class cabin. You can option it up further, but this one here has just got the standard sport seats, as they're called, finished in black leather. Not a massive fan of the verde silver over black combination because you can get better interior colors, but that requires ticking option boxes. And that is a bit of a surprise to me because the E-Class now starts at $130,000 list. And you really have to add 2 options to make this car feel luxurious enough. The first one is fitted to this car. It's the Premium Plus package, and it adds things like the panoramic sunroof here, the heads-up display, and a few more features. But that's not really enough. You also need to go for a package called the Energizing Comfort Plus package, because firstly, that gives you comfort seats, which will better suit the car, available in black, beige, or tan, which I think would be quite a fetching color if you wanted to go with this verde silver on the outside. But you're also getting heated seats in the rear, and you're getting a bunch of other features, which lifts this car to where it should be as an E-Class. That does lift the price to $150,000 drive away, So that's kind of where you need to be thinking in terms of price point for this car, but that's probably to be expected from a modern day E-Class anyway. Seats themselves, relatively comfortable. I don't have adjustable side bolsters on this particular seat, so I have been flopping around a little bit as I've taken this car through a few corners, but overall, feels like I could do a lot of miles in these seats to be pretty comfortable. Notably, they do have both heating and cooling, which you can operate at the same time, if you prefer as well. Leather on the door tops here, stitched leather on the dash as well. It feels suitably premium, plus nice Mercedes touches like the open pore black wood down here, although this one's already starting to scratch and come away, and the car's only got 2,665 Ks on the clock, which is not particularly impressive. Build quality, we know it's been an issue in recent Benzes. Still a little bit of creaking, but a lot less than in some of the other cars than we've seen over the last few years from this brand. So I think things might be going in the right direction. Storage, big flockline bottle holders in the doors, lots of cubbies down here, phone charging with a bit of passive cooling, a box between the seats here with additional charging possibilities as well. Two other features that come as standard on the E-Class for Australia, one of which is important and one's a gimmick. The gimmick is this camera right here. We've got a selfie camera. You can, in fact, join Zoom calls in this car when you're stopped, and you can use the camera for that. Again, you can let me know the utility of that from your view, but it's certainly interesting. And then on the useful side for me is the Burmester stereo. It takes quite a bit of calibration in the EQ to make it sound good, but once you put in the effort, it can sound great. And an interesting feature is one called 4D sound. There are actually rockers in both front seats. You can turn it on for one or both seats. And this basically is a bass line that vibrates the seat in line with the music. So for big songs, live performances, that sort of thing, that can work really well. I've got it turned off most of the time, but I have enjoyed it for a couple of tracks and it's certainly pretty cool. All in all, I think the interior is pretty nice. I'd just go for it in a lighter color. The E-Class is a big sedan and you expect a roomy back seat from a big sedan, and that's what it delivers, at least for 4 adults. Getting a 5th person into the car is going to be a stretch. The transmission tunnel is pretty enormous, and so you'd be competing for footroom with the people in the outboard seats. But if you're in one of those outboard seats, you'll find the rear of this Mercedes-Benz to be very comfortable, even for a longer road trip. That starts with a seat base, which is nice and angled up and really does support your legs. You don't have to splay them or do anything weird. You just sit here and you're supported, which is not always the case in cars that we review, even luxury cars. Legroom behind my driving position is very good. I'm 6 foot or 183 centimeters. Headroom is also fine, even though this car does have the panoramic sunroof from the Premium Plus package. Tow room is a little bit tight, with my driver's seat as low as it'll go, but nothing really to complain about. You do get quad zone climate control, which is probably a little bit surprising given that this car doesn't have the higher climate package option, and all of the nice materials continue here into the back, including the leather on the tops of the doors, which feels suitably premium. There is also a flip down armrest here with your usual Mercedes outfit, a sort of device holder thing there where you can keep pushing, and you've got a couple of cup holders too. So, you know, on the whole, really comfortable, easy place to spend time here in the back. Moving around the back of the E-Class now, I'll give you a word on styling. It's not my decision about whether or not this car looks good. It's so subjective, it's really up to you, but I'm happy to give you my opinion. The first one is that the verde silver or green silver color on this particular test car I think is quite attractive in the flesh. In photos, I didn't love it, but in the metal, I think it actually looks quite good. You'll notice that for Australia, our E-Class specification is an AMG line, so you'll notice the big 20-inch multi-spoke wheels, and we'll talk about their effect on the ride and handling shortly. However, Mercedes hasn't gone so far as to give this vehicle a mandatory black pack. So there's still, you know, the appearance of chrome around the vehicle. You can tell that it's meant to be a luxury car. That being said, I would have loved to have seen a non-AMG variant of the E-Class aimed at more traditional buyers with slightly smaller wheels, and just, you know, you don't need AMG floor mats on an E-Class that's an E300, do you? I also want to quickly talk about over-branding. I don't think a Mercedes-Benz E-Class needs to have Mercedes logos all over it, but this one does. The grille is full of Mercedes stars. Even the taillight graphic is a Mercedes star. It looks like these sorts of motifs might even come to the upgraded S-Class at facelift time. Just not sure that's necessary. When you're a Mercedes, it's enough to just be a Mercedes. But again, keen to know your opinion. This is a sedan. We have a power tailgate here. It opens up quickly to reveal 540 litres of boot space. It's a nice big deep boot. So whether you're just putting golf clubs in here or you want to use this vehicle as a chauffeur-driven vehicle, for instance, plenty of room in the boot. Underneath the boot floor, just a tyre repair kit and some additional space. No spare wheel on this vehicle, sadly. Also sad is the fact that Australia does not get the E-Class wagon. The United States doesn't get the wagon either, but they do get an all-terrain version, which is lifted and cladded like an Audi all-road or a Volvo cross-country. Would have loved to have seen that in Australia. Sadly, it's not on the menu. When it comes to running costs, it's all relative in terms of the Mercedes-Benz E-Class. If you're already looking at purchasing a relatively large luxury sedan like this, then the cost of servicing it and filling it up is unlikely to be front of mind. That being said, there are still some interesting academic differences in running costs between an E-Class and its various rivals here in Australia. Because frankly, the E-Class is pretty expensive to run, mainly because of servicing. Mercedes-Benz offers long service intervals on its cars, which is very convenient. And on this vehicle, you can go 25,000 kilometers or 12 months between services. So for high milers, this car might be suitable for you. However, the servicing plan is noticeably expensive, just under $7,000 for 5 years and 125,000 kilometers of scheduled maintenance. That is much higher, basically double what you'd spend on something like an Audi A6. In terms of fueling the vehicle, efficiency is okay for something so large. In town, I've managed 10 litres per 100 kilometers without having to try too hard. On the highway, you'll see mid to high sixes, again, without too much effort. Warranty on the vehicle is 5 years and unlimited kilometers. But I think an interesting point is that most of the sales in the segment that the E-Class now competes in are for fully electric vehicles, which can be more expensive to buy, although not that much more than the E300, which is already pretty dear, and their running costs are much lower, particularly if you can charge the vehicle at home. That being said, again, when you're spending about $150,000 drive away, saving money at the Bowser may not be the first priority, but I am keen to hear your view on that concept. Please let me know down below. All right, let's go for a drive now in the new Mercedes-Benz E-Class. Now, I don't think anybody expects the E-Class to be the driver's car in this segment. That's why the 5 Series exists, and then you've got options like the A6 and the Jaguar XF, which is about to be discontinued, which is sort of halfway between a BMW and a Mercedes in terms of their sporting aspiration, I would say. For me, I don't really want the E-Class to feel like a sports sedan. I actually want it to feel like a luxury car that's serene, quiet, always comfortable, and has adequate power. And I think that's an important point because Mercedes has hugely contracted the choice of engines in an E-Class for Australian buyers over the years. Just a couple of generations ago, there were turbocharged petrol 4-cylinder starter pack E-Classes, petrol V6s, diesels, V8s, and that was before you got to the AMGs. Now there's just one E-Class that doesn't have a full-fat AMG powertrain, and it's the one that I'm testing, the E300. 2-litre, turbocharged petrol 4-cylinder with quite significant 48-volt mild hybrid assistance. Thankfully, this engine's pretty good, and I'll come back to describing why that's the case. But in a way, it's a shame that Australians have really deserted this segment, mostly for luxury SUVs, because in other markets around the world, the E-Class can still be had with a much more significant array of powertrains, including 6-cylinder petrols and diesels as well, plus various plug-in hybrid options, none of which are available in Australia. It's the E300 or nothing, or of course you could wait for the AMG versions if you want a much more harder-edged vehicle. The comparison can also be drawn too to other vehicles in this segment, which have accepted that there is relatively low volume for sales in Australia of large luxury cars, but those sales can be relatively profitable, so it makes sense to keep offering more customer choice. The BMW 5 Series is probably the best example, which does offer a similar powertrain to the E300 in its base model, although with a little bit less power, but it still offers 6-cylinder diesel power, an M5 plug-in hybrid, and 2 all-electric options, including in a station wagon. Much more choice than you get in the E300. But if product planners have cynically decided only one version can come to Australia, you'd want it to be like the E300, because it actually is pretty good at being a jack of all trades. To start with, it's plenty powerful enough for almost everybody. Put your foot down, enjoy the slightly synthesized raspy exhaust note inside, and it picks up quickly. The core engine itself produces 190 kilowatts of power and 400 newton meters of torque, but the 48-volt mild hybrid system can generate quite significant additional torque when the conditions are right. And the conditions are right quite a lot of the time, because over my week of testing the E300, it never felt like a slouch, and you could often feel that electrified, instantaneous torque filling the gap in the engine, sort of picking up its trousers and starting to run. That being said, the engine and automatic transmission itself is pretty lag-free and slick and smooth to drive. You basically just don't really think about the engine and transmission in this car, which is the way you want it to be in a luxury-focused vehicle. So the powertrain's sorted. As much as I would like a 6-cylinder, for a 4-banger, this thing ain't too bad. But what about the ride and handling of the E-Class? Again, remembering what I'm actually looking for here is plushness rather than firmness. And mostly, the E-Class delivers pretty well. And that's because Mercedes-Benz Australia didn't fall into the same trap that their counterparts in the United Kingdom did, and which I was worried they would, because there are so many similarities between our right-hand drive markets. And that's that in the UK, for whatever reason, you can't get air suspension on the regular E-Class. For Australia, it's standard, as it should be for a car like this, which has quite a lot of weight and big wheels as standard. And the air suspension really makes the ride quality of the E-Class. First of all, it jumps up a little bit to make it easier to get in, so if you prefer a vehicle with higher ride height, this car sort of splits the difference for entry and egress, which is nice. But the air suspension mainly delivers a really refined gait as the vehicle makes its way down the road, and it's really good at dispatching almost all the common sorts of bumps you find on Australian roads, particularly in town where this vehicle will spend much of its life, but it's also an adept country tourer apart from that worry about having no spare wheel and tyre. The thing that trips the E-Class up, and which you notice only because there's so little to notice about the ride quality normally, is expansion joints and deeper pits that have been cut across the road surface and which have a square edge. Simply put, the air suspension can't react in time, and there's not enough profile in the relatively large wheel and tyre package on this vehicle to cope, and so you do get a bang into the cabin, which is not unique to the E-Class. There are plenty of cars on big wheels that behave this way. It's just that the Mercedes does such a good job of soaking up almost every other kind of imperfection that you really tend to notice these ones. And the problem with expansion joints is you often can't drive around them, so you have to just put up with it. How would you solve this? Well, one of the main ways would be to offer a smaller alloy wheel. And I do think it's a shame that you can only get 20-inch wheels on this car in Australia. For my tastes, they're too big for a car which shouldn't be trying to be sporty. The E-Class should be trying to be the luxury option in the segment, and in so many ways it succeeds at being just that. So it doesn't need 20s, 18s, or 19s at a stretch would be big enough for this car. They'd look large enough and they would deliver more protection to the ride when you go across more difficult bumps. That would be my submission. Refinement, though, is pretty good in this car. Road noise is kept relatively minimal. Again, it would be less if the wheels were not quite as large on this car. Wind noise hasn't been an issue, although I am hearing a bit of a whistle on this blowy day from somewhere. I'm not sure where it's coming from, but I can hear it. Visibility out is really good, except the side mirrors could be a little bit better. But also a shout out to the safety package on this car. I know it's working. I've felt some very subtle effects, but it's so well tuned and so subtle that I'm not really looking for controls to turn it off. And for me, that's the mark of properly calibrated adaptive cruise, lane keep, blind spot monitoring, plus you have a clear 360-degree camera in this car as well. So the E-Class is an interesting package. I think if you're willing to accept a turbocharged 4-cylinder petrol with mild hybrid system, you're willing to forego a 6-cylinder engine that you can get in some rivals, then the package delivers. But what if you want a 6-cylinder? Well, you'll need to go to the A6 or to the 5 Series. What if you want a fully electric option? Well, you could go to the Mercedes EQE, but that car is nowhere near as slick as this vehicle in terms of its lightness and its agility, nor is it anywhere near as attractive to my eyes. Sorry, truth bomb, the egg-shaped Mercedes EVs just don't look good. So if you do want all electric, then I'd be recommending that you look at something like the BMW i5, which just looks like a normal 5 Series, or perhaps an entry-level Porsche Taycan, although you'd be spending an awful lot more on that electric Porsche than you would on this E-Class. Also, a word on the steering, which I think will suit a lot of Mercedes fans because the steering is so familiar from Mercedes cars going back at least a few generations before this one. The steering is really light, particularly in comfort mode, which is the mode that suits this car and what I've left it in most of the time. There's not much road feel at all that comes through the steering wheel, but the ratio is intuitive and the car pretty much does what you expect. However, it does have 4-wheel steering and it does have that slightly uncanny effect as you turn in that you get more steering than you would expect coming from a car that doesn't have that feature. So that's just a bit of an adjustment period. However, what it does for the turning circle is phenomenal. This car is a big car and yet it turns on a dime like a hatchback. You get used to that convenience so quickly. 3-point turns become 1-point turns because you can just complete it in one go. Parking this thing is easier than you'd expect. Nice job on the steering, Mercedes. So those are my opinions on the new W214 Mercedes-Benz E-Class in E300 AMG line, guys, as we receive here in Australia. Frankly, this vehicle is an impressive effort. If you like your Mercs, you've had a few E-Classes before, I think you could purchase this car and be really happy with it. The performance, surprisingly good from a turbocharged petrol 4-cylinder engine. The ride quality is pretty serene, although it does get tripped up on those nasty expansion joints from time to time. And the handling is, well, what you'd expect from an E-Class. It's tuned to be pretty soft and plush, and I think that is exactly what owners like. For me, I do think the latest BMW 5 Series is a better car in a few ways. Significantly more choice on powertrain, the availability of all electric if you want to go that way, and an even higher balance of great ride quality and good handling. But some people don't want a BMW, and only the opulence that the Mercedes-Benz badge communicates will do. And that's exactly why the E300 still exists here in Australia at the price point at which it does. And frankly, I quite like this car. Very keen to know your opinion though, so please let me know down below in the comments. While you're there, hit subscribe and the notification bell if you enjoy Chasing Cars reviews. And as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.